everybody, and thanks for joining us today. Welcome to this masterclass on SQE Success with BARBRI, where you'll learn the top 10 test-taking tips. We're excited to have you here this afternoon for this very important session and hope that you enjoy this masterclass and find it informative. The SQE is unlike any exam you've taken before, and mastering its unique challenges starts with the right strategy. This session was designed with this in mind, and we hope you come out of this session with useful advice and strategies to succeed. So we always start our masterclasses with our learning outcomes. So by the end of this masterclass, you should know what sets the SQE assessment apart from other exams, learn how to approach questions strategically, discover new ways to revise and retain information under pressure, and just feel more prepared to face the SQE assessment day. I'm going to hand over to our panelists shortly, but first I'm just going to quickly go over some key information for today's session. Please use the online question tool to post any questions that you have, and I'll be posing them to our speakers at the end. The masterclass is being recorded. The recording of the session will be sent to registrants after this session in a follow-up email, and it will be available on our YouTube channel shortly as well. And also, please check out our next month's masterclass with Shoesmiths, which is all about AI in the legal industry. The link to register for the event will be in the follow-up email. But if you're eager to register sooner, please head over to Law Careers Net's events page and register there. And you'll also be hearing about Law Careers Net Live, which are our annual legal careers conferences for aspiring solicitors. There are 3 conferences happening in November and December in Manchester, London, and there's an online version as well. So if you're looking to kickstart your legal career, network with top law firms, attend workshops and panel discussions, then I would strongly recommend you apply for Law Careers Net Live. The link to apply will also be in the follow-up email and on our events page as well. Okay, so with that out the way, I'm just going to start off by asking all attendees to answer the question on the screen so our panelists can get an idea of who's joining us today. So I'm just going to share these results. It seems like, interestingly, 44% of you are in work and 31% are postgraduate students. And we've also got a decent amount of first year and non-law students as well. And I'll just run one more poll, which is about what's your biggest concern about the SQE? So is it understanding the format and the structure of each exam? Is it time management? Is it retaining and applying legal knowledge, approaching multiple choice and scenario-based questions, or just managing stress and exam day anxiety? Okay, thank you. Just going to share these results again. It seems like there's a pretty even split between understanding the format and structure, retaining and applying legal knowledge under pressure, and approaching the multiple choice and scenario-based questions as well. Thank you a lot for sharing this. I think this will be quite useful for our panelists today. And with those polls out of the way, I'll happily pass on to Joanne from BARBRI and Larissa.
Great, thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joanne White. I am a senior tutor here at BARBRI. In terms of the agenda for the next hour or so, we're going to take a look at all things SQE, predominantly SQE1, although at the end I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have on SQE2. So we're going to look at what sets SQE apart from other academic assessments, how we can approach questions strategically, ways to revise and retain information under pressure, managing time effectively during preparation and on exam day, also the mindset shifts that makes a difference to your performance in SQE1. I'll go through some tips for effective study. There are top 10. And then we'll just end with how you can enroll with BARBRI and how you can stay in touch. And then any time that's left, more than happy to answer any questions. So that's the kind of format of the session. Okay, so let's start with what sets SQE exams apart from other academic assessments. Now, most of us will remember exams as being essay-based. So a particular subject or topic, and you had the opportunity to prepare a subjective piece of work albeit based on your knowledge and understanding of that area or topic. Now, certainly within the legal profession, times have changed and there's been a shift away from essay style questions. And one example of that is the newish SQE1 exams, particularly SQE1. And this exam is now centralised and standardised, and all aspiring solicitors are required to pass the same assessments. So SQE1 is known as a multiple choice exam, but don't be fooled into thinking that that makes it an easy option, because that's far from the case, as anybody who sat the exam will tell you. It requires a practical application of scenario-based questions, as well as having a good understanding of the black letter law that sits behind those scenarios. SQE2, on the other hand, takes a little bit of that black letter law from SQE1 and it tests you in a practical way. So how you can advise a client on those areas of law in 6 skills, 4 written skills, 2 oral skills. So that's the kind of basic difference between the 2 exams. But everybody now who is going down the SQE route will have to sit SQE1 and SQE2 unless you have an exemption for some reason. So how are we going to approach the questions strategically? If we take a step back for a second, one of the questions that students often ask me is, why does there need to be any strategy at all? Surely if the answer is right in front of you, it makes it much easier to pick the correct answer. Now, there is some truth in that, but rather than thinking of this exam as a multiple choice exam, it's better to think about it as a single best answer exam. And that's because of the 5 options that you have in front of you, all 5 could be legally correct, which obviously makes it a bit harder. It's just that one of them is the single best answer based on the scenario, based on the fact pattern in front of you. So just guessing won't help. You have to have a system. In SQE1, there are 180 questions over 5 hours in one exam. And then the same for the second exam. It's split into 2 parts. So let's take the first exam. That works out as 90 questions in 2.5 hours. Then you get a 60-minute break to reset, refocus. And then you get another 90 questions in another 2.5 hours. And that's your 180 in the first exam. A week later, you do exactly the same for the second exam, different subjects, but the format is exactly the same. Now, what we teach you at BARBRI is how to learn the law rather than memorize the law. Memorization will only take you so far, and you cannot possibly memorize enough law to get you through 180 questions on each paper. We also help you to work out your stronger and weaker areas of law. There are 16 subjects tested in SQE1, and you're not going to be friends with all of them. There will always be nemesis subjects that kind of catch you out, but that's okay, because the good news about SQE1 is that you don't have to get a particular number of questions correct in any given subject. You just have to get enough questions right to hit the pass mark. The other thing that we teach you is how to understand the questions and what is being asked, rather than just recognising them. Whichever provider you use, they will have a particular drafting style. But Kaplan, on behalf of the SRA, who will be drafting the questions for the real exam, will have a different style. Naturally, everybody has a different drafting style. So you can't even just learn the style of the questions from the provider that you have. The trick is to understand the law. And then if you understand the law that sits behind the questions, it doesn't matter who's drafted them. The style won't matter. You'll understand the principles of the law. And then you'll be able to have a better chance at answering the questions correctly. So you don't just want to recognise them, you want to actually understand them. In order to revise and retain information under pressure, this is a really common source of stress with our students. And I think you've already probably seen that it's harder than you might originally think in order to prepare and pass this exam. But planning and preparation is the right approach and the correct approach throughout your studies in order to get you to where you need to be ready for this exam. So the first thing is you need to adopt an effective learning technique and stick to it. So you only have 1 minute 42 seconds for each question. That's to read it, understand it, recall the law that sits behind it, and select the correct answer from the 5 options in front of you. So you can see that a scattergun approach to answering questions won't help you at all. As I've said, the focus needs to be on understanding and not just memorizing the black letter law. So one thing to consider here is how long you will need to be able to do this effectively. So the length of the course that you want to sit, given other things that you've got going on in your life. And it's interesting that most of you are in work. So the longest course that we have is 40 weeks. Most students who are also working take that 40-week course because it gives you 10 months in order to prepare and practice and get ready for this exam in amongst everything else that's going on. Now, a lot of students say, oh, 10 months is too long. I'd rather do the 20-week course, or if you're not working, the 10-week course. But it's really something that you need to consider because unlike school, unlike college perhaps, even university, where you perhaps only had studying to focus on, that's not the case when you're doing professional exams. There's also a lot of other things to consider, and particularly for those of you who have a job, especially if it's a full-time job. So considering the length of the course is key, really, in order to prepare for this exam. But going back to the questions, read the questions carefully, even though you are under time pressure. Don't rush to answer them. Now, timing is always an issue with this exam. Even the thought of only having 1 minute 42 seconds to answer a question seems daunting. But if you set your kind of stopwatch on your phone and just sit in silence for 1 minute 42 seconds, you'll actually see that it's a bit longer than you might imagine. But ultimately, taking your time, reading the question properly, and selecting your best answer the first time around makes you more likely to get the answer correct. You can flag questions and come back to them later, but if you do that, remember that you'll be more tired and more stressed than you were the first time you saw the question. And all our data shows that those who do that are less likely to change the answer to a correct one. Your first instinct is usually the best option for you. So take your time and think about the answer. Following on from that, at BARBRI, we teach you what we call our systematic problem solving method, which teaches you to predict the answer before you even look at the 5 options. And what that helps with is reducing the distracting answers, because remember, all 5 of them could be legally correct. You might be easily distracted, but it helps reduce that distracting answers if you have an answer in mind before you look at those options. And without doubt, that method has been fundamental in helping BARBRI students to pass SQE 1. The other thing that's important is throughout those 5 hours per exam is to disconnect from the questions and take a break to refocus. It's a long exam. And with practice, you can ensure that you'll still have the time to take a little break, to disconnect from the screen, just to rest your eyes and refocus before carrying on. Because to have that level of focus for 5 solid hours, even though you've got the break in between, is really tough. Now, some students will say, I can't be doing with that. I need to just plow on and get through the questions as quickly as possible. That seems the most efficient way to do it. But there's no point in answering all of the questions quickly if what you're actually doing is then selecting A instead of B and getting the answer wrong. So whether it's taking a bathroom break, whether it's standing up to get some water, or even just closing your eyes and resting your head in your hands for a minute or two, disconnecting and taking a break during the exam can really help, particularly with focus. So let's move on to managing time effectively, both during revision and on exam day. And another question that is often asked regarding timing and focus is how all of that can be effectively managed. So let's take revision first. The first thing I would say is practice in exam conditions. Start as you mean to go on. Now, at the beginning of any course, it's perfectly natural and perfectly acceptable to give yourself a bit more time until you get used to our systematic problem solving method. But what you're working towards, certainly by the mock exams, is being able to practice the questions in exam conditions. So that means the correct timings, you're not giving yourself any longer, the correct environment. So you're doing it sitting at a computer, looking at a screen. All of those things make a big difference. And that's what I mean by environment. It's not possible to count for 1 minute 42 seconds per question. So the other thing is to keep yourself on track by blocking the questions. And what I mean by that is that if you aim to do 10 questions every 15 minutes or 20 questions every half an hour, it makes it much more manageable. Triage the questions if necessary. As I say, you can flag them and come back to them. So if you've got a tricky question that you know you'll be able to answer, but it's only question 2 and you want to get through a few more before you come back to it, you can flag it and come back to it. The one thing that I would say about that is even if you flag a question, always put an answer in, because in the event that you don't have time to come back and revisit that question, you still have an answer. Because if the exam ends and you haven't answered any of them or haven't answered some of them, you will definitely get those questions wrong. But if you have put something in, one answer in, you've got a 1 in 5 chance of getting it right. So it's worth still guessing in those circumstances. So the easiest thing to do is to select an answer, flag it, knowing that you want to come back to it later. The next point about effectiveness is answer every question. There's nothing to lose by answering every question. As I say, you've got a 20% chance of getting it right just by guessing. Now, that's not going to help you pass the exam overall because that's not enough to pass, but there is no negative marking. So you only get credit for the questions you get right. You don't get anything knocked off, no negative marking for any questions that you get wrong, which is a bonus in this exam. And then review the flagged answers only if you have time. If you don't have time, hopefully you will have still put an answer in, so that will be counted as your answer. But if you have got time to go back, then it might be the time to have a break, reset if you've got the time to do that, and then go back to your flagged questions, and then you know you've done your best with each and every question. Okay, moving on to mindset shifts that will make a difference in your performance. And so far, I've spoken about practical ways to get through the questions using various methods and techniques, but there's more to passing this exam than just knowing the law. Because even if I could guarantee that you knew every single answer to every single question, that doesn't mean you will automatically pass this exam. Because if you're too tired, too stressed, too hungry, you could simply make mistakes and press the wrong button and select the wrong answer, even if you knew the right answer. So how do we combat this? We need to adopt a growth, not a fixed mindset. Now, a fixed mindset means you are of the view that your intelligence and your talent is fixed. It is what it is. There's nothing that you can do about it. And your response to setbacks is to give up and feel discouraged. Can't do it. There's no point. But that's not going to help you in this style of exam. Doesn't really help you in any exam, but definitely not in this type of exam. What we need is a growth mindset. And that means you believe that your intelligence and talent can be developed both through learning and effort. And your response to setbacks is seeing them as opportunities for growth and persisting through challenges. In terms of focusing on learning instead of fearing mistakes, you're going to get a lot of questions wrong as you prepare for this exam. However, see it as a learning opportunity. Why did you get it wrong? What exemption or exception did you miss? What rule did you not follow? Don't fear your mistakes. Remember, you are aiming to pass this exam. You are not aiming for perfection. Nobody gets 100% in this exam. And that's absolutely fine. It's a stepping stone to the next stage of your legal career. In terms of setbacks, view them as temporary, not permanent. When you learn any new skill, you'll make mistakes. It's all part of the learning process. It's the same with learning to drive. It's the same with learning to play a musical instrument or learning to play a sport. All part of the process, but it's temporary. You get better, and you get better with practice. Exactly the same principle for SQE 1. The next thing I just want to touch upon is adopting a self-care routine as part of your study. And by that, I mean things like factoring breaks. You don't want to just be studying continuously because your brain gets tired, your eyes get tired, and that's when you make more mistakes. So factor in breaks to your study. Don't see that as skiving off and just ploughing through. It's a really important part. Obvious things like eating properly, getting lots of sleep can also make a real difference because stamina is really required for this exam. It's a long exam that you need to focus on. Now, this might be something that you think this is way in the future, a week or so before exam day. But if you adopt those practices right at the start of your learning for SQE 1, they will become natural habits by the exam. And that's the position that you really want to be in. And then just finally on this slide, seeking help is a strength, not a weakness. At BARBRI on our courses, we have lots of support in terms of tutor support, but it's not just what happens on the course that you need to think about. You need to think about your own personal circumstances. So have you got a good support network in place? You might need to call in some favours, whether it's with your friends, whether it's with your employer, to give you the time necessary to study. Don't feel obliged to say yes to everything you're invited to. This is your time. You only want to sit this exam once. And so any support that you can gather, absolutely gather it. This is your time. And so don't be afraid to use support where you've got it. And as I say, at BARBRI, we have a great support system, both in terms of the tutors and the students. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go through some top tips in order to remind you how to be effective with your study. Some of it we've kind of covered, but it just kind of puts it into some kind of context for you. And the first tip is to organize your time from the start. So if you've not yet signed up to sit SQE 1, then consider your other obligations. Are you working? When will you be able to study? What other things have you got going on? Do you have any life events in the duration of the course that will mean you have to stop studying? That might be a wedding, it might be a holiday on the other side of the world, it might be something planned that you've not kind of considered will fall within that study period. So consider all of your obligations. It's not that realistic to expect that certainly on a 40-week course, you would have nothing that comes up that affects your study, but it's worth considering because you just don't know until you actually consider it. Things get forgotten about. Get yourself a plan in place for study time. Consider when you are going to study. Are you going to study in the evenings? Are you only going to study at weekends? Are weekends even a problem? Have you got an employer that has flexi time where you could study in the day? Try and get a plan and an idea about how many hours per day per week you will be able to dedicate to study. That's sometimes a useful way of working out the right course and the right provider to choose. Creating a dedicated study environment, really important as well. And this is particularly important if you're working but you work from home. You don't really want to just switch from work mode to study mode with no change at all. Now, you might have to stick with your environment if you've got an office or a workspace, but taking a break before you come back to study, even something as silly as it sounds, changing what you're wearing. So you're not in work clothes, you're in relaxed clothes. Changing your environment and creating a dedicated study environment really can help as well. Schedule time off, really important. You cannot just keep studying, especially if you're working full-time as well. I did all my studying part-time while I had a full-time job, so I speak from experience on that. You have to be able to schedule time off. Otherwise, you will still take time off, you'll just feel guilty about it. And we don't need guilt. You've got enough going on without feeling guilty about scheduled breaks. So you need to schedule some time off as part of that process of organising your time from the start. And also share your plan with family and friends. You know, you might become less sociable, you might become harder to get hold of, you might need to switch off your notifications. So people will start worrying about, you know, why this change, what has happened. So share your plan with family and friends. Let everybody in your network know that this is your time and you need to focus on your study for this exam. Second tip is aim to stay on track. So you need to hold yourself accountable. And part of the way that you can do that is set realistic goals from the start. So it goes back to, when are you going to study? There's no point in saying, do you know what, I'm going to study for 2 hours every night, 5 days a week, and then give myself the weekends off. Because one thing I learned from studying part-time is that you can have the best plan in the world, but one thing you can never account for is how tired you're going to be when you get home from work. So you have to make it realistic. You have to make those goals work for you. Now, depending on the length of the course, and as I say, our longest course is 40 weeks, there is time. If you fall behind, you can catch up. You've got 10 months between the start of the course and the exam. The problem with falling behind is it causes unnecessary stress. And so the personal study plan that we provide you with keeps you on track. It tells you when you're behind. It tells you how many hours per day you have to study for. It tells you that those hours will go up if you fall behind. It keeps you on track, but it's really important that you do stay on track. And if you do fall behind, seek support early, don't wait. Now, as learning coaches, as tutors, we have a performance coach as well. We are all on hand to book appointments with us to talk about whatever you need to speak about. But seeking support early helps us get you back on track. Don't leave it. Don't worry about it. There's no judgment from any of the BARBRI tutors. We're just here to help you. So the sooner you ask for help, the easier that we can help you get back on track. One of the other things that it's helpful to know about SQE is that you can prioritize key subject areas if necessary. And what I mean by that is you don't have to get a certain number of questions correct in any given subject. And as I was talking earlier, you might have a nemesis subject. So technically, let's say you didn't like contract law. Technically, you could get all of your contract law questions wrong, as long as you get enough right in the other subjects in order to hit that pass mark. So even though there are 16 subject areas tested in SQE1, you don't have to be brilliant at all of them. It's a balance between them, and we can help you prioritise those key subject areas if necessary. Ideally, you would want to have a good working knowledge of all of them, but we're also realistic about what people can achieve, and we can work with you to conquer any fears over dreaded subjects that you might not be looking forward to. Third tip is check in for support. So as I say, you can use the dedicated learning or performance coaches at BARBRI. You can use study groups or peer support. We have data on our study plan, which will show you where your weaker areas are, and we can put a support plan in place around that. But also outside of any course, look at what your employer can do to support you. Can you condense your hours? Can you get study leave? All of that can kind of help. And the sooner you get those plans in place, the easier that it will be, and the less stress will build up. And also, as I say, family and friend support as well is really important, particularly when it gets towards final revision and the last few weeks before the exams. You kind of shut yourself off at that point. You're in a bubble, but it's important your family and friends understand why. Otherwise, you'll constantly be pestered to still be available in the way that you would have been without the course. One thing we talk about at BARBRI a lot when you're on one of our courses is trust the process. This is a very different exam. And, you know, our PSP, our personal study plan, you will learn to use that effectively. It's an intuitive assistant. It creates a bespoke study plan for you. And what we use is what's called interleaved learning and spaced repetition. So we don't just give you, here's all of your contract law, here's all of your business law, go and learn it. We give you a little bit, and then we move on and we do a different topic. And then we go back to the first topic, and then we move on. And so it continues. And the reason that we do it that way is that's the most effective way of learning for this type of exam. Because in the real exam, you're not going to get 20 business law questions, followed by 20 contract questions, followed by 20 dispute resolution questions. It's going to be all over the place. It's going to be business, contract, ethics, dispute resolution, back to business. And so your brain has to start working in that way that you can switch between subjects every 1 minute, 42 seconds. And we use our interleaved learning and spaced repetition process to be able to teach you how to do that. We also use our systematic problem solving method, which is the one aimed at predicting the answer rather than just guessing from the 5 options in front of you. When you're on question 80 of 90 and you're exhausted, you don't want to be distracted by 5 options that all look very similar. You want a more definitive approach, and that's what the systematic problem solving method really helps with. And then, as I've said already, we're aiming to pass the exam. We are not aiming for perfection. Now, as lawyers, aspiring lawyers, we are all perfectionists. We want to be perfect, and we want to be perfect now. And it can be a real challenge to unpick that. But that's the best way to prepare and get ready for this exam. And we've got lots of tips and tricks that we can help you in terms of getting out of that mindset, certainly. So, 5th tip, don't be afraid to practice. So some students never quite feel ready to give the questions a go. They want to do more revision effectively before they start the questions. Don't save the questions until you feel ready. Do them as and when they arise. We expect you to get the answers wrong, but this is a long process. And as I say, with practice, you will get better, but you've got to learn how to get them wrong before you can understand why they're wrong and how to then get them right. It comes from practice. Answering these multiple choice questions is a skill, and it's a skill that needs to be learned. And if you're not going to answer the questions, if you're not going to practice with them, it just becomes much more difficult. So even if you get all of them wrong, every single question we have gives you an explanation at the bottom as to why the answer was correct, but also why the other 4 were incorrect. And that in itself is a real learning skill as well. Your personal study plan will allow you to take the questions multiple times. So it might be that as part of revision, you go back and you reset the early ones to see if you've made any progress. All of that data is captured on the personal study plan. All of that is very easy to read, and then you can work out still where your weaker areas are. All of that data is available on all of the study plans, regardless of which length of course you partake in. Number 6, and I'm repeating myself, I appreciate, but it's because it's really important, and that is you're aiming to pass the exam. You are not aiming for perfection. So 16 areas of law, that's an extensive syllabus. You need to pass each FLK, so each functioning legal knowledge exam. There are 2, 180 questions in one, 180 questions in the other, so 360 in total. And you need to pass that FLK. You don't need to get every question right in every subject, or indeed, as I've said, any questions right in a particular subject. There's guidance on the SRA website with how many questions there will be per subject. Some subjects are bigger than others. So, for example, business law, contract law are big topics in the first FLK. Ethics, tax, much smaller subjects, so fewer questions. But there's links on the SRA website to tell you how many within a range will be in each subject. And again, that will help you look at your revision plan as to where your revision is going to be focused. If you are not very good at tax, let's say, and a lot of students don't like tax, and there might only be 6 or 7 questions on the whole paper, is it worth spending a week revising tax when you still might not be very good at it at the end? Or is it better to use that week instead revising business, where there might be 36 questions on the paper? It's that kind of thing that allows you that strategic planning, and that kind of helps you with your weaker areas as to whether it's worth trying to get better, or whether it's such a small subject that you might want to move on to something that's more lucrative in terms of the number of questions. So what you're aiming for really is a broad brush approach to your knowledge of the law in as many topics as possible, because that gives you the best chance of getting some of the questions right in each of the subjects. You might then want to let go of some niche areas, and that's within a subject. So it might be you don't like contract law, but it might be actually questions on offer and acceptance, questions on consideration you're absolutely fine with. But anything to do with remedies, not so great. So it might be you don't ditch contracts, or you don't see that as a negative subject. You focus on the areas where you know you could get the questions right. You don't worry about the niche areas where you've got more chance of getting it wrong. So that's what I mean by that broad brush approach. Second one is your mock exams in timed conditions. So as I said earlier, you can take a bit longer, and naturally you will take a bit longer, but timing plays an important role in SQE1. And by the time you get to your mock exams, which depends on which course you're on, but on the 40-week, maybe a month and a half before the final exams, you want to be doing them in timed conditions, because you want to replicate as much of the exam conditions as possible. So that will allow you to tweak anything that needs tweaking before the final exam. So controlled timing is something that you need to practice. And by the time you get to your mocks, that's kind of where we say you want to be. If you are too slow, you're taking too long to answer the questions, you could lose marks simply by not answering them all. So you might run out of time, in which case the exam will submit itself if you run out of time when the clock's ticking down. If you've not already submitted it, it will just disappear. if you've not answered the last 10 questions, you will get those 10 questions wrong. So too slow doesn't help, but too fast, you have a tendency to either press the wrong button accidentally. So it's not that you didn't know the answer, it's just you pressed A instead of B by accident because you were doing it too quickly, or you're not read the question properly. You've kind of misunderstood. And bearing in mind that all 5 answers could be legally correct, understanding what the question is asking you is a really important part of it. And also, if you do it too fast, some students will say, I had an hour left at the end of the exam. Then you think, actually, you can't leave the exam. You've got to sit there. So the tendency is to start tinkering with the answers that you've already put in. And all the evidence suggests that if you start doing that, you're more likely to change them to an incorrect answer. So we have inbuilt mocks if you sign up for our SQE1 course, or you can buy the mocks as a standalone product. So we have various options available for you. But the important point there is really timed conditions by the time you get to that stage. Tip 8, engage in healthy study practices. Avoid online discussions about progress or the exam. You are not in a competition with anybody else. It doesn't matter how anybody else did or is doing. There's a lot of misinformation on social media about SQE. So be careful about online discussions. My advice to my students when they get to the stage where the WhatsApp group's stressing them out is mute that group, get out of that group. It's not helping you. So be careful about things like that. As I've said, reduce socializing as the exam approaches. Tailor your revision to focus on your strengths. You want to pass the exam, so go with your strengths first, rather than trying to be equally good at subjects that realistically you might never get to grips with in the time available. And also a really good tip that a lot of students find helpful is when you get to revision, plan your revision by task and not by the number of hours. And what I mean by that is some students will say, I don't understand why I'm not progressing. I did 4 hours of study last night. And that might be fine, but was it productive studying 4 hours? Or did you convince yourself you were studying because you were physically sitting in front of your computer reading the textbook for 4 hours? As opposed to, I only spent an hour, but my objective at the beginning of the task was to understand remedies within contract. So I only did an hour, but I'm now far more likely to get remedies questions correct. That hour is far better than the 4 hours. So it's about the task in hand, not the number of hours that you are studying. We've all done it. We've all kind of convinced ourselves that we've studied for a load of hours, and I don't know what the issue is, but if it's not productive, the number of hours is totally irrelevant. So bear that in mind as well. And as I said, factor in relaxation time. I never did that when I was studying until it was a bit too late. And I still did take time off, but I just felt guilty about it. So everything I did in my downtime, all I was doing was thinking, I should be studying, I should be studying, I should be studying. Whereas if it's factored in and you've scheduled it, that guilt just isn't there. Well-being, really important to talk about this as well, because as I've said, other factors play a part in your success. So the correct amount of sleep, the correct food, exercise, relaxation, downtime, all things we can support you with at BARBRI, but really important wherever and however you are studying for SQE1, you have to build up some stamina. And part of that is getting all of these things right. You cannot suddenly change from poor sleep, poor food, no exercise, and no relaxation a week before the exam. It won't work. So it needs to be a fundamental part of your studying. Really important that. And then the last tip is just choose your provider carefully based on what you need. Now, at BARBRI, we have a comprehensive curriculum. We have an exam-based approach. We are teaching you to pass the exam. We are not teaching you everything about all of those areas of law. We give you all the materials that you need, a personalised study plan, and a strong support system. It's an online course, even though there's lots of live delivery, there's lots of live opportunities to speak, but is an online course right for you? You want to make sure that you are choosing the right provider for you for the right reasons, and we can certainly help you make that decision. But we have excellent pass rates. Our students are very pleased with the intuitive PSP, and all in all, our students do very well on this exam. It's a difficult exam, but it's not insurmountable, and we're here to support you all of the way. So that kind of ends the top 10 tips. I just want to kind of finally end with, if you want any information about enrolling, we have got a £300 early bird discount available for the next available exam. Applies to all upcoming prep courses, part-time or not. There's additional funding support available as well. So if you want to scan that QR code or take a photograph of this slide generally, then please do so. I'll just leave it there for a second or two to give you the opportunity to do that. And then just the last slide, if you want to stay in touch with BARBRI, another 2 QR codes there for you to be able to scan as well and just follow the links. But that's all I wanted to say in terms of content. More than happy, as I say, to answer any questions, but thank you very much for listening. And I'll hand back over to Dimitar.
Joanne, yeah, so we have had some questions come through, so it'll be great to go through a couple.
Okay.
There's one about advice on preparing for the SQE. What type of advice would you give to non-law students for preparing for the SQE?
So in terms of the materials available, non-law students are equally catered for as law students. It doesn't matter. If you look at our stats and you look at our data, law students and non-law students do equally well. It's about the process for learning. We have a foundations course. If you're a non-law student and you want to have a bit of a foundation grounding before you start the SQE1 course, that's available as well. But actually, the data suggests that non-law students are not at a detriment because they have a different degree. So nothing to be concerned about there.
I would 100% agree, and also would recommend checking out Law Careers Net's non-law hub, which is sponsored by BARBRI. You can find a lot of useful information there as well. Another question is, what is one effective reading technique to read effectively while absorbing as much info as possible, i.e. focus on the answers or the text first?
So the way that the personal study plan works is that interleaved process. So we give you some videos, so lectures to watch. We intersperse that with a little bit of reading, but not a lot of reading. And then we give you some questions and we mix them up throughout the PSP. It's not just this is all the lectures, then this is all the reading, then this is all the questions. It's mix and match. In terms of reading generally, I always say to students, read the book as though the textbook, as though you're reading a novel. So when you're reading a novel, you're not focusing on every word. You're not reading paragraph 1, going on to paragraph 2, but then still thinking about paragraph 1. But if I asked any of you, tell me something about a novel you're reading at the moment, you'd be able to tell me something. That's the level of absorption you need at the start of this course. So often, because your mindset is that of perhaps previous courses, previous exams that you've studied for, where this is all of the information all in one go, and I need to learn it because I'm never going to come back to it. That's not the way our prep for SQE1 works. So it's reading it to a level where you've seen it. And then as we go through the course, we go back to it and you layer up that knowledge. So I would say your technique should be as though you're reading a novel, not that you're trying to understand it and memorize it. And obviously at the start of a 40-week course, you're never going to remember everything that you've read in the first week. Your brain can't handle that much information. So reading it in layers, and having read it, maybe you didn't understand a word of it. Our PSP would say, move on, we'll come back to it. Layering up that reading is the way to go.
Great advice, thank you. And I think at the start, you sort of mentioned flagging questions at the start that you might come back to later. And someone had a question like how like more of the specifics of how to flag those questions, like on the
Yeah,
paper. Or...
so when you get your exam on your screen, there's a little button at the top right, which is a flag. And when you're on that question, if you press that flag, it will automatically flag it. And then you can go to a review screen at the end, which will have all 90 questions, just numbers 1 to 90. And the little flag will appear on the questions that you flagged. And then you can click on each one and it will take you back to that relevant question. You don't have to rummage your way back through 90 questions to find it. So it's a very simple process. And if you look at the functionality on the SRA website, you will get a clearer idea of what that looks like.
That's great. And there's a question from Greg about sort of how to mentally recover from like wrong mock answer exam, like answers in the exam. So once they want to understand how to keep going with the setback and also not wasting time.
Yeah, so I think it's important to accept that you're going to get some questions wrong. Roughly speaking, and this is just a rough guide, you need to get about 120 correct. You can get about 60 incorrect and pass SQE 1. Now, the way that the number of questions works, then there's no more than 36 questions in any one subject, which is why I say you could get all of your questions wrong in a particular area. You would still have more that you could get wrong in other subjects. So it's important to think, well, if I'm getting it wrong on the course, let's say, we have very detailed explanations. So it's about understanding why you got it wrong. Did you get it wrong because you didn't understand the law, in which case we explain that to you? Or did you get it wrong simply because you weren't concentrating and you just pressed the wrong button? But I think it's important to accept you are going to get some questions wrong. So this isn't about doom and gloom because you've got, some of them wrong. It's about how many did I get correct? Because as I've said, we are aiming to pass the exam. We're not aiming for perfection.
That's great. Then there's a question about BARBRI preparation courses, which might be nice to reiterate. Kyle has asked, does BARBRI teach the black letter law subjects as part of these preparation courses, i.e. tort, contracts, trust, etc.?
Yeah, all of the subjects are in our textbooks. So we have 2 chunky textbooks, one with all the FLK1 subjects in, one with all the FLK2 subjects in, and there's also a revision guide which summarizes all of those subjects. So absolutely all of the law that you need in terms of the subjects tested, all in our materials, absolutely.
Great. And I think it would be nice to finish off with this question. What would be your top tip for the final month before the exam?
I think it's important a month before the exam to take a step back and to look at how far you've come, what you've achieved, because it will be phenomenal, even though at that point you'll probably be at your highest stress level because you won't believe that you're ready for the exam. Nobody ever feels that they are ready for this exam. And let's face it, exams are horrible. Nobody likes exams. And even if you are fully prepared, you are going to feel stressed going into any exam. But knowing how far you have come, resetting those questions, as I mentioned earlier, and realizing you're now getting them all correct when the first time you did it, you got none of them correct, is a real boost and encouragement to your progress. Apart from that, I would say start looking at some of those things if you've not done it already in terms of well-being. Is your sleep okay? Are you eating correctly? Are you factoring in breaks? You don't want to go into this exam exhausted. You want to go into the exam well prepared. And the final month is really a good time to take a step back and assess all of that.
Thank you very much for this advice, Joanne. Just before we conclude, I will pop on a final poll for the attendees on the screen. which will be about what their key takeaway from today was. So just as in the beginning, if you could please answer the question on the screen. So what's your key takeaway from today? Have you learned more practical test taking strategies that you feel like you can apply? Have you learned better time management techniques for revision? Do you know more tips for managing stress and staying focused? Have you learned more about how BARBRI supports SQE candidates or something else? Okay, just going to give you a few more seconds to get your answers in. Thank you very much. I'll share those results on the screen. Thank you for that. It's great to see what you've taken from the session. Before you go, just another reminder to attendees that we'll be sending out a link containing the recorded session, so please keep an eye out for that. A survey will also be popping up once this masterclass has ended, so please fill that in to let us know how you enjoyed today and what other topics you would like us to cover in the future. Remember to keep an eye out on our events page for the AI in the legal industry masterclass that I mentioned at the start, as well as Law Careers Net Live, the legal careers conferences, and make sure to check out all of BARBRI's resources and preparation courses on their website as well. And thank you very much once again to our panelists, Joanne and Narissa, for joining us today. And for everyone that's attended, we look forward to seeing you again next time.